Hello everybody and welcome back to another short mini-series with Process Pat. This week we're going to talk about story pointing and estimates in general. We are going to debate, and hopefully I will put it to rest, that story points are the end-all be-all. They are the best way to estimate your work, especially while working within a complex environment, which is just about every team that's developing software today. So the greater that your teams have to scale, the more that they have to communicate, the more dependencies that occur within your organization. Those estimates become more and more important because you have others that are dependent on you or you that are dependent on them. And that's where the consistency and the ability to be predictable come into play, so that you're really able to sequence out that work over a period of time, communicate effectively, understand the scope of the work that your teams are committing to, and the objectives that you're committing to within a sprint, and then you're able to execute against those. So the better your teams are at estimating, the more simplified the overall working environment is going to become, and you are going to be able to set the right expectations for your team and your organization as you are executing against your plan. First thing I want to get into is comparing both story points and hours together. We have hours on the left, story points on the right. Hopefully we can put this argument to rest after this. I compare these on 3 different levels. First, efficiency. Second, on expectations and communication. And third, just on the overall the team itself as they are estimating this work. Talking first through efficiency. Story pointing is going to win every time. We are not targeting exactness. We are targeting good enough that helps the teams understand the scope of work and feel comfortable enough to plan and commit to that work in a given sprint. Whereas hours is least efficient, especially if you are talking in hours and not days or not weeks. When you start to get down to the hour estimate, the half-hour estimate, it requires exactness, and exactness is impossible in the world of complex software development. It's just not possible. It's a waste of time, and you are never right. The next is expectations and communication. So the whole entire purpose of story pointing, at least at its core, is that the team understands and discusses the scope of work, go through the description, the acceptance criteria, the assumptions that are being made, and the team really understands what's involved in developing that piece of software, that story. And with hours, it's really hard to have those same level of conversations, because the hours are based upon the individual that are doing that particular task. So when it comes to expectations and communication, you're ensuring that your capacity for the team is consistent. You have historical data over time that helps you understand the team's velocity, and you're able to make estimates based off of the relative time frame of the sprint to commit to that work with confidence. Whereas with hours, are you talking, hey, this is going to take me 4 hours to do? Is that keyboard time? Does that account for your commute home? Does it account for lunch hours? Does it account for an interruption that happens in the middle of the sprint? That level of exactness just isn't needed, and it causes a lot of confusion, especially when you're communicating across stakeholder groups. The last is around individual estimates versus team estimates. Story pointing happens with the team. The entire team is there, they all participate, they all have the opportunity to ask questions and really understand and eliminate a lot of the assumptions associated with the work that they are doing. Whereas hours are all dependent on the skill set of the individual and their ability to complete that work. Something that may be 3 days for one person may take 2 hours for another. So you can't really estimate as a team, because you're focused on an individual story for an individual person and their individual skill sets, whereas team estimates are applied on the basis of the team completing that work over a 2-week time frame, with a number of things that go into that estimate that help the team understand and become more comfortable with committing to that work in the backlog. Now, I talked a little bit about the relative data that you are able to leverage when it comes to capacity planning and your team's velocity. But one thing that is key, and I just need to make sure that I call out here, is that developing a velocity, developing these metrics among your team is specific to that team. The whole purpose of an agile team, a scrum team, is to develop consistency. So if you, and each team is made up of different skill sets with different people, the work in the backlog is different. And so the way that they estimate is different because it's all based on relativity. So the rule of thumb, number one thing that you cannot do as a leader in your business is to compare the output, the velocity output of one team to another. That's a no-no. It doesn't make sense. You just can't compare those two things. But a lot of leaders like to do that and think that that is the right thing to do. Please don't do that. Stay away from it. That will cause a fear-based culture, and you'll find that your team just starts to leverage these and manipulate the data to make it look like they're doing the right thing when they aren't. Stay away from team comparisons. All right, back to the regularly scheduled topic here. So what are story points? What goes into a story point estimate? Well, there are a few things that go into it. It's not just the size of the work. What we care about and what the teams talk about when they go through the planning process is the amount of work associated with what has been defined in the story, in the user story. The complexity of the work. So not only how big is it, but how complex is it? Do we have a lot of experience developing this particular technology? Well, we may not. So that will be factored in. We have risk and uncertainty is the third thing. So when you're not going to know everything up front, even if you have a well-defined story. So there's always a level of risk or uncertainty that is associated with it, or maybe the requirements aren't as clear as you would like them to be. So that needs to be factored in as well. So the amount of work, the complexity of that work, the amount of risk and uncertainty, that is going to give you your point estimate. Every time you go through and playing planning poker, which we'll get into in another series, these are the conversations that are happening. How much work is involved here? What's the complexity of that work? What's the level of risk and uncertainty? And when you start to get good at this, it becomes very easy to point. You start to get into a rhythm, and the teams become absolutely incredibly consistent and predictable, which is really, really, really cool to see. All right, so next we're going to get into some relative sizing, a method that I use, leveraging a capped Fibonacci sequence that really helps teams become consistent. Now, when I'm developing these methods and I'm rolling them out operationally amongst all the groups, we can't compare teams because all their points are going to be sized relatively within their own team, so they can't be compared. But you can roll out standard structure that helps them to point within that same structure. And so I like using a capped Fibonacci. Other teams like using different scales along the same capped Fibonacci sequence, and some use some that are a little bit different than that. But this, over the years, I have found has been the easiest to understand and comprehend. It sets ground rules, base rules for everybody across the organization. Everybody understands it. It's super easy and simple, and you don't need to waste a lot of time, so it's also efficient. And this is what that looks like. So this is relative sizing with a capped Fibonacci. I like to cap this at 21. I think that that's very important. 21, if a team agrees that a user story is 21 points, that means it's too complex, there are too many unknowns, it needs to be broken down, or maybe we need to develop a spike so that we can go and research this topic, break this work down, and then commit to it in a future sprint. So this gives them the ability to basically highlight things in the backlog. You can't bring a 21 pointer into a sprint, but it allows you to flag these things, pull it out to a future sprint, and then work on breaking that work down so the team truly understands it. Other than that, you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. 13 is the largest that you can pull into a sprint, and it depends on how long your sprint is, what the duration of the sprint is, but with your standard 10-day or 2-week sprint, 13 would be the largest that you'd be able to pull into that. And basically what this means is that You start with your flagstone user story that everyone agrees on, that they are most familiar with, and you size that. I like to take the smallest thing in the backlog, and you make that a 1. Everyone agrees with it. And then you start to go through your user stories and you start to assign points to them based off of those 3 components that we just discussed in the previous slide. So if something is twice as big as that 1 that you had established as your flagstone, then that would be a 2. If you have something that was 2 times as big as that number 2, then that's likely going to be a 5. If you have something that's twice as big as that 5, then that'll be maybe a 13. And the whole purpose is that the teams are flipping over their estimates at the same time, and they are revealing what they think that story point is going to be for that one user story. And what that does, the most important thing here, is that it allows you to focus in on the outliers. So if someone throws a 1 or a 2 or a 3, and then all of a sudden the whole team has small numbers, and all of a sudden someone throws an 8 or a 13, that's when you know, all right, I need to go and focus in on why you believe that's a 13. Maybe there's something that we are missing. So you start to have that discussion. Maybe there was there's some complexity that the rest of the team didn't understand that this one person does, and it allows you to have the conversation, which allows you to point it the right way, and then that helps you with your commitments for any given sprint. You're able to set the right expectations with your team, your stakeholders, those that are dependent on you or that you are dependent on. Develop consistency, become predictable, and then you'll find that over time your teams are no longer running into these inter-sprint dependencies. Teams are able to deliver what they committed to. Everybody has a real good understanding of the work that they have defined as ready and are going to start executing against. And then the whole engine just starts to run itself, and it's really cool. So I am always in the camp of a point-based estimate, story points. I like the cat Fibonacci sequence, and I've seen it used time and time again with being extremely effective. It's much more efficient. It helps the teams to collaborate, helps them understand exactly what's on the table. It forces communication and conversation, and overall it's better for the entire organization. So there you have it. I'll come out with another user mini series on planning poker and how to operationalize this. But these are some of the pros that were associated with points, some of the cons associated with time-based estimates such as hours. I hope you're able to use this and put it to work. And then look out for more videos. I hope that you guys are liking and subscribing. Again, thank you so much. Have a great day.